Uh, we're really looking at four different components. There's multiple models of emotional intelligence, but these are some of the four very common components of it. Self-awareness, so the awareness of my emotions. What does it feel like when I'm mad, when I'm sad, when I'm happy or disappointed? Social awareness, so the awareness of the emotions of others around me. And this is really important to us as educators. I think we need to understand our own emotions to understand that of others, but also when we pause and reflect and try to figure out how to address issues with students, I think trying to understand how a student is processing emotions is really important. Self-management. So how do I manage my emotions? When I get really upset, how do I handle that? When I am frustrated, what do I do to manage my frustration while also trying to maintain professionalism? And then the one that's probably the most challenging is relationship management. How do I manage the emotions of others? So this comes with like the whole, how do I, give and receive feedback? How do I manage my students' emotions or help them learn how to manage the emotions where they're not getting super frustrated, or as somebody said in the chat, taking it personally to the point where that feedback, while you might be giving relevant feedback, isn't being soaked up because they're not taking it the way that you were hoping. So just as a little review, so I did the project in our OTA, so our occupational therapy assistant baccalaureate program. I included the project in 2 courses that included clinical experience. I also was lucky enough that during the project, we ran a falls prevention program day in the Trinity Center where all of our students had to interact with the community, other disciplines, other people. So that actually really was a blessing in disguise because it gave them some reflective moments that they were able to latch on to regarding the emotional intelligence education. So in general, students are expected to have strong academic skills and possess self-awareness, reflection, and problem-solving skills. Students experience anxiety, depression, and burnout. And one of the things that kept coming up in the literature was it's not just burnout from classes, it's burnout from external sources. I mean, ICE was a super big topic last spring when it started and continues to be an issue. And that obviously is affecting students differently. Now we have, back in my day, I didn't have social media. So like when I was in school, social media wasn't a thing. And now all of a sudden students are being inundated by like all of this material. So, their anxiety's higher, levels of depression. I think that on top of academic expectations really can disrupt professional behavior development. Emotional and professional behavior skills are essential for success. We know that. We know that when we send students out on internships or clinical experiences, that students that are more professional and are more able to regulate their emotions do better. Emotional intelligence has been linked to academic and fieldwork success. So students that are able to receive our feedback on assignments, projects, group work, whatever it is, are essentially going to do better, and they're going to probably do better out when they get a job because they're going to be able to communicate with their colleagues a lot more. So the research question for my project was, does a 6-week training on emotional intelligence improve students' perceived ability to implement professional behaviors in an entry-level occupational therapy assistant program? So when I did a literature search, a ton of literature came up regarding different disciplines' use of emotional intelligence training. People in the business side of academics use emotional intelligence training in their classes. A lot of health science presence, psychology. There was a lot of information from the STEM fields. So it's something that is being used out there. I think it's just, how do we use it and how do we incorporate it? That is going to be the key. So some common themes in the literature. So empathy was shown to increase professional skills. If you have empathy for yourself and others, the chance of you being professional out there is better. Emotional intelligence has been shown to improve communication, professional competence, and academic engagement, which is huge. If providing education on those 4 components of emotional intelligence is going to help with academic engagement, I think that's worth trying to incorporate it somehow. Another theme that came out of the literature source was mode of education. So a lot of these programs did in-person training, did hybrid online training. There was a fire department during their fire training for firefighters. They had online modules that they made their fire students do on emotional intelligence to help build relationships with the people they were working with. People did role playing and coaching, and then there was a lot of research that centered around self-reflective exercises. So for my program, I specifically wanted to see what the duration, what the evidence showed for the duration of the project. And a lot of the literature talked about anywhere between 6 to 12 weeks of training for emotional intelligence to show improvement with EI skills. And some found that even doing just a simple workshop can show improvement with focus, gratitude, and presence, and resilience. I think resilience is another topic that I don't want to dive too much in, but resilience, I think, with students is another problem. So just to give you guys a little background of how I set these up, in the 2 classes that I implemented this program, it was 6 weeks long, and each module it was broken up into 4 modules. So into the 4 areas of emotional intelligence: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. So learning about your emotions, controlling your emotions and adapting to change, learning about empathy, and in the OT therapy world, therapeutic use of self and active listening, and then collaborating with your class and working as a team. After the first 2 modules, I did a role play activity where the students had to role play through different professional behaviors issues using what they learned in their emotional intelligence modules. And that took off very well. The students really enjoyed it more than I thought. And we'll go through those examples in a bit. So 6 weeks isn't a ton of time to show change. However, there was a change in how the students perceived their ability to implement professional development. There was also a change per question, so I gave a Likert scale questionnaire. There was also a large change in students reporting that they were aware of the emotions of those around me, which I think was pretty significant. Some things that came out of the qualitative portion of this study was that students had an awareness of self and others. They themselves felt that they had a reduction of personal anxiety and stress. They felt that they were able to receive and improve based on feedback. They felt more confident at work. So some of the students that have work outside of school felt that they were able to communicate with their team more confidently. They felt more confident in the ability to resolve conflict and use active listening. Another fun thing that came out was that participants self-reported their ability to apply active listening during community falls prevention event. So we had the community falls prevention event about halfway through the emotional intelligence training. And the next Monday, when the students came in, all of them talked about how they applied a lot of the emotional intelligence training and tips to this falls prevention event, working with the senior population, which I thought was huge, because you're like, are you really paying attention to me and like listening to what you're supposed to be doing? Another participant reported observing their fieldwork educator. So our clinical educators that we work with when we send students out on clinicals, demonstrating empathy and therapeutic use of self. So they were starting to pick these out during their clinical experiences. The majority of the participants agreed that emotional intelligence training should be included in the OTAB curricula and should include case studies and additional role-playing opportunities. And we talked about these already. So I utilize the mixed model of emotional intelligence. This model focuses on self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. The primary person that really uses this model is a man named Nathaniel Goleman. He's written a ton of books. You probably have either had to do his emotional intelligence training or have taken like a personality test from him. But I incorporated his model of emotional intelligence and applied it to our curriculum and what the goals were of our program. I'm going to get a little nerdy with occupational therapy, but I'm also going to give you guys ways to apply self-reflection as well. So one of the things that we did was I used the CAWA model, which is a occupational therapy model, to have the students self-reflect on barriers, supports, and environmental factors that affect how they perform in school and affect their ability to implement professional behaviors. So CAWA means river, and basically the students draw a river. The river can ebb and flow based on rocks. Those are the barriers, based on driftwood, which are factors that can help or hinder the river's flow. Based on the river banks that change the river's flow, those are things in their environment. And so this really open concept model gives them a way to self-reflect on things that are challenging for them. And it also gives them an opportunity to kind of talk to me about them, because otherwise I don't know when we would I would get a chance to know these things. So here's a more clear definition. So again, the rocks are obstacles, the riverbanks are environment and context, and the driftwood are influencing factors. So here's like a little example. So at the beginning of an OTA student journey, at the start of their river, and here's at the end, the professional OTA, improvement in professional behavior. So, maybe students view the athletic center or gym as a supportive part of their environment. Maybe they have imposter syndrome and they consider that a rock in their river to success. Maybe they have a fear of feedback. I don't know how many of you love getting feedback. I think feedback is super helpful, but also anytime someone's like, I want to give you feedback on this, I get a little like shaky. I'm like, oh gosh, what are they going to say to me? So, listening to some of their issues and some of the things they're actually nervous about, and also giving them some driftwood, meaning the emotional intelligence training, to help aid their river flow to be professional. Now, you guys don't all have to make rivers. However, if you want to, I'd be happy to show you how to do the model. I did come up with a couple different activities, and some of these things also came up in the literature. So doing a 2-minute check-in. So starting a lecture by asking students to identify one word that describes their current internal state to help students build self-awareness. Reflective journaling, and this could really be done any way that would fit your classes or your programs. But after a difficult exam or project, assign a low stakes reflection. How did you manage your stress during the task, exam, group work, whatever? And what would you change next time? So this kind of goes along lines with those group projects. We've been trying to do a little bit of peer reflection and peer review at the end of a group project, where they will provide feedback to their peers. And while it's challenging, I think it also gives them a way to practice how to give feedback and also practice how to receive feedback. Modeling is super important. So normalizing error. When a professor makes a mistake in a lecture, they can narrate their emotional response and how they correct it, which helps model self-regulation or management of your own emotions. I think modeling is huge. Sometimes when I'm frustrated with students about being late to class, and then I try not to parent because I have a 4-year-old, and sometimes the concepts of gentle parenting merge into this as well. But when they're late to class, sometimes instead of like giving them dirty looks or, being really showing that I'm really frustrated, I'll vocalize it and I'll be like, I prepared a lot for class and I'm a little frustrated that the majority of you have arrived late. I understand things happen. But this makes me frustrated and makes me upset. I had to take some deep breaths to be able to focus on this lecture, which is you're modeling how you like, you're kind of showing your disappointment, but you're also modeling how you handle those frustrations. And then I've also been trying to link it to professionalism. Like, oh, when you go back into the field or you're, on your internship, the lateness, 15 minutes is a big deal. 20 minutes is a huge deal. So I did the Caldwell model. They did their 4 learning modules on a program called ThingLink, and I'll show you that in a minute. And then each model, even with the role playing, each module was accompanied by a discussion board. So after they finished their module, they would be prompted with a professional development issue or a professionalism issue that they had to apply what they learned, and they had to comment on each other's solutions. So I'll show you guys how this ThingLink program worked. If it does it for me. Nope. There you go. So you basically, it takes you through a lesson, basically. So you go in order, numerical order. The next lesson doesn't unlock until you've completed the one before it. You can embed YouTube videos. You can embed knowledge checks. You can embed recordings of yourself. I've embedded podcasts in these. I've embedded me reading professional development issues. I found it as a really useful tool. Unfortunately, I got this free through my doctoral program and no longer have access to it. But Moodle actually has a component called lessons that I have not explored yet, but it's something similar where you can develop a lesson plan, and it's something that we have interest in. I'd be happy to take some of this and put it as a Moodle lesson, and you guys can use it as you would like. The Padlet discussions I thought were fun, and the students reported that they really liked it. It's basically a discussion board. It's a little different than just our Moodle discussions, but a lot of the students said it was like being on Instagram and reading the comment section. So you can import GIFs. The students were able to read the professional behavior dilemma, respond. They had to respond with a GIF or a meme that reflected the solution they were proposing, and then they had to respond to 2 of their classmates. So when we talked about role playing, all of the discussion boards and the learning modules were done outside of class as assignments, but the role playing was done in person, and I took 2 classes to do it. So here's an example of a role-playing scenario. So each group would get a different scenario. This one had to do with interacting with a fieldwork coordinator, I believe, and dealing with somebody that wasn't listening to them. So it talks about how they're being dismissive of the student, and undermining their request to use PPE. And so here were some of the discussion questions. So one of them was analyzing Sarah's behavior. So what professional and ethical responsibilities did she fail to meet as a supervisor? Evaluating the student's response while walking on a fieldwork site is generally unprofessional. Was Jordan's action justifiable in this context? So we worked through these questions through role playing, and the students gave they had great acting skills, but they also really talked through some of these questions and reflected a lot on how to apply the emotional intelligence training that they had. Before I talk about things that you guys can apply to your class, I did want to point out at the end of the study, some important quotes that came out of our focus group that I ran about what the students thought about emotional intelligence and its importance in the curriculum. And one student said, for me, I would say that my old Caldwell model I had hyperfixation, and I feel like I learned to have empathy for myself because there was a time I was super sick. I wasn't able to physically study for a quiz the next day, and I didn't do as good as I wanted to, but I passed, and I feel like I showed empathy for myself. Another one talked about how that she's a behavioral aide with children with special needs, and she learned how to advocate for herself and students by talking to other colleagues better. Few students reported that they feel like they have a better understanding of their emotions and that it helped them reduce some of their anxiety around school, which I think was pretty significant. So 3 things that I want you guys to take home from this brief, quick emotional intelligence presentation would be, one would be empathy. So this is one of my favorite videos. It's very quick. So it's kind of um, a goofy video, but I really like it because I feel like it really helps put in perspective as educators that the way you respond to a student matters. When I first started teaching here, I had a student who was not turning anything in and was very disconnected in class, she just hardly showed up. And I didn't know what to do because I was new and, I was seeking advice from my colleagues. And then one day I went and talked to her and I was like, what's going on? Like, do you not want to do this? Like, if you don't want to be like an OTA, like, don't keep doing the work because it's a lot of work. And she was like, I'm having extreme anxiety. I can't sleep. I'm getting overwhelmed by work and it's piling up. And I know I'm getting zeros in all of this because it says in the syllabus that after 3 days late, it's a 0. So I wasn't gonna try and do it. And I was like, I mean, fair, it does say that. It's syllabus. So I asked her, like, do you want to do it? Like, how can I help you be successful? And I know that's not always possible. Like, I know in a lot of the programs, you can have large class sizes, and that's really difficult to have those one-on-one conversations with people. But I think opening up the semester, being like, hey, if you're struggling or having a problem, which I'm sure all of us do, but maybe making it more of a point to be like, I want you to come talk to me. If you need something, come talk to me. And opening up that dialogue is really, I think, could make a difference. The student, I told her, I said, if you complete these lab assignments by next Friday and you send them to me in an email, I will take 0 points off. I just want to see that you did it. She ended up doing it. She stayed after class a couple days to work on it. And now she's entering our Masters of OT program. So I'm not saying that moment was the like make or break moment. However, I think taking that time and trying to use empathy and understand where she was coming from really did make a difference. And what a shame it would have been for her to have failed out that semester because she was feeling overwhelmed. And occupational therapists use this term a lot, but therapeutic use of self is the ability to use your own personal experiences, you as a mode of therapy. And so, like, talking to her, I was like, I've had anxiety before where I've also not wanted to have done things. Like, I've missed paying a bill because I was so anxious to look at my bank statement. And like, you don't have to get too personal with the student, but I think them realizing that like people struggle, and even their professors, as successful as we all are, can, fail or struggle with things. The other lesson is learning how to be an active listener. So how do we actively listen? We have to pay attention to the person speaking. I've noticed this with myself when I've had students come up to my desk or like after class come up to the podium and ask me a question, and I'm like responding to an email. I'm trying to shut things down because I'm like, I want to go and miss traffic. But that's demonstrating that you're not actively listening. So I think either if you really do have to go, shut it down and be like, please let me know when we can talk about this better. I have office hours at this time, or taking a second to see what the concern is, because this might be the only time the student wants to talk to you, which can be challenging. Also verifying that we understand what the person or student is saying, and also remembering it for later. So I'm going to repeat back to you what you just said so that I understand it. Having them repeat back to you what you said to make sure they understand what you're trying to convey to them based on whatever issue you're having, can really make a difference. And it's a two-way street. As a professor, as a teacher, we need to have active listening skills, but also training a student in having active listening skills is also important. Tips for receiving feedback. So develop a habit of asking for feedback. This is for students and for professors. So, after a couple weeks, sometimes I'll like send an email or I'll ask in class, I'll be like, hey, what is working and what is not working? What can I do better? And what do you think you need to do better at in this class to be successful? Teaching students how to mentally prepare for feedback. Something I've been trying to do instead of just being like, I need to talk to you, and then just like spitting out all the stuff that the student's doing wrong. Being like, I'm going to give you some feedback. Are you ready to take this feedback? Some of this feedback might be areas of improvement that could be difficult for you to handle. So if you're ready to take it, like, let me know and I'll continue. Just to give them like the ability to practice receiving it, especially for our healthcare students. I feel like they go on these clinical experiences and sometimes those environments are super fast. And so receiving feedback in a really fast manner can be difficult. So practicing those skills beforehand is important. Teaching students to have a growth mindset. So understanding that giving feedback or receiving feedback is inevitably there to help you grow. It's not to penalize you. It's not to tell you that, you're not progressing in a certain way. And I think one thing I've noticed about students in this generation is like, they either do it wrong or they do it right. You're either, if there's a lot of very much like black thinking. They either, like what you're saying or they don't like what you're saying. So trying to have them develop a growth mindset versus I'm giving you feedback and all of a sudden you're shutting down. Being an active listener, understanding the point of feedback and seek clarification if you're confused. So this is also where modeling comes in. So the students might not ask you or tell you that they're confused, but saying, hey, can you repeat back to me what I said to you? Do you understand like the feedback I gave you? What are you going to do differently now that I've given you that feedback? And the difference between feedback and advice. And I think, especially for educators, I sometimes get overwhelmed with the thought of, well, this is how I would do it, or this is how I think it should be done. But if the students are demonstrating that skill, or they're demonstrating that, they're doing well at the assessment you're asking them to do, you might have a way to do it, but maybe they don't want to be like you and they want to develop their own path. So making sure you understand the difference between feedback and advice. State your agreement before your disagreement. And I think this is where students struggle when they get on the defense. So I'm trying to do a lot of work with students, like right when they're starting to get defensive with me, is being like, I want you to tell me the parts of the feedback I gave you that you agree with. And then you can tell me, some of the things you feel at conflict with. Because I think starting off that way and modeling that for students help them in the future when they are on internships or clinical rotations, to better accept feedback from different people that aren't you. And then making sure students and yourself do something about the feedback, take it and implement it, I think is important. Especially as educators, if you get feedback from students that is relative, not like, oh, we don't like that you give us assignments, but like maybe like, we don't like that assignments are due on Sunday, we pick a different day to have them due. If it's within reason, like, try and implement the feedback to show that you're listening. So then I was wondering if you guys could take a moment and either talk in the chat, talk to the people around you, but how do you think utilizing some of the emotional intelligence training can be applicable in your classes or programs? So just take a second. Yeah, but you free can talk.
So, can you go back to the slide before me?
Yeah.
There's something on there that I really liked.
Is for CVP.
Yes. I like the idea of like setting up the students from the very beginning with that idea of everything that is delivered, the feedback is delivered is for your overall growth and not to be punitive, because I think feedback has become a place.
From a negative,
Yeah, absolutely.
It putting in the defense.
Absolutely. So how to help them and shape that and build that from the very beginning of the growth mindset, and that idea of like, this is ultimately for your self-direction and your self-directed learning and to promote your self efficacy. I think it's a great place to start.
I think I do. How do you provide feedback to your students? Did you try different strategies and see different results? Because at the beginning, when it was my first semester, I was doing very structural, here is the feedback, and I quickly sensed the students were not welcoming that structure. Yeah. So I changed a little bit my structure, and instead of telling them in the following minutes, I am going to give you feedback. It's more like I relax a lot. Like instead of saying, you're going to make a presentation that is a very tense work, like students get on super tense. They said, we're going to do an exercise. So they relax okay, it's not it's not a dissertation defense or something like that, you know, it's just an exercise to receive and provide feedback. And then we all in the class try to play an exercise that is called the sandwich exercise, in which we do something positive,
Right.
the feedback, and something positive.
Mhm.
So, and sometimes the students is like, okay, here is my feedback. And like, okay, you forget to give something positive, and then when it's like, that's it. No, and what is the other part of the sandwich, right? That's something to conclude with something positive. So I came to learn that, you know, trying different strategies, and finally, so I think that one relaxing the words, instead of saying, do you have a minute? I need to talk to you. It's like that putting them the tense. But she said, hi, how you been doing? We miss you last time. So it's like, it's the feeling away. It's the same
Right.
message, just grab it different.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
yeah, and then after try and error, right? Then, okay, this is working.
Yeah.
With this cohort that, as you said, many times they see in 1 and 0s, right? In I did well or I did bad.
Right.
You know, and with that frame of mind, I just try to practice.
And I think that's when they start shutting down, is like the moment like that you start giving them any type of feedback, whether it's just like, I need you to change the font. It's like, I can't handle it. It's too much. So I think like trying to reframe it and also, you know, practicing, even like you demonstrating the appropriate language of like what good feedback looks like you demonstrating a growth mindset while giving feedback to them. Eventually that exercise or the sandwich exercise is great. Like how that's probably going to trickle down in other ways for them in the future.
I also think, I think definitely the sandwich approach is utilizing the feedback in a positive sense is essential. But I know I often, when I'm talking to the students about feedback, because I'm also focusing on a fieldwork education, to let them know that you're not always gonna get feedback in a specific kind of time frame. So I like what you're saying. You may get feedback in real time, or you may get feedback throughout the dynamic. So it's important to take an active role in interpreting some of the feedback, because it's not always, like you said, okay, we're gonna talk. It might be going on consistently. And I think that approach is really good because it doesn't seem like it's, it has to stop and start. It's an ongoing effect of feedback. And I think another thing, as you mentioned, Angela, is I think having them understand feedback, right? Like that, because I think, like in your earlier slides, I think that's what jumps out to me. And especially in your narrative for more of the Cow students, I think of the realistic component is a lot of our students don't have that many experiences outside of, because of their youth, right? And so those who don't, some of these concepts they're not aware of, right? Their maturity may not allow them to be aware of those. So giving them like the experiences and doing it in small groups helps them have that kind of reflection to understand feedback and how it can be positive. Because I think that, like you said, they always view it as negative. And so in that vein, I try to show them like on fieldwork, it can be positive, like take it as a positive, right? Take it as a learning experience. It's not given to you because it's punitive per se, it's given to you to improve. So be positive about getting it, like even if you get 5 things, it's not that it's use those 5 things to empower you. Don't use
Right.
them to say, I'm doing bad on 5 things. It's 5 tips to get better.
Right, and I think that's the other issue that we're seeing with students, and this is just all anecdotal and just, my
Yeah.
hypothesis, but like the lack of interaction with people face to face, I think is a challenge. And like even we were talking today about how to make a client who's struggling with social anxiety, use the Kugli Cafe as an example. Like, how do you make that easier or harder for them to challenge their social anxiety? And they all were talking about like people sitting at a table. And I was like, what about how do you pay when you go into the cafe? And they're like, what do you mean? I was like, well, how do you pay? And they're like, you just tap the thing. And I'm like, well, there's a person. The counter. And then I'm like, how do you ask for food? Like, do you ask for food? And they're like, oh, I only go to the self-service areas. Cause I think there's a lot of there's a lot of anxiety around like interacting with people.
Definitely.
And so I think that is also where we're seeing a breakdown. And when you were talking about, Richard, the lack of experiences, like I had a job when I was 15 years old, and it was like at an amusement park, and it was kind of ridiculous, but like I think forced me to maybe develop some of these soft skills where I don't think that's happened. And I'm not saying everyone needs to have a job at an amusement park at 15, but like
They do.
I think, yeah, I think that we're expecting a lot of things out of our students, but they're not getting the experience to match our expectations. And I think that can be challenging. And then Patrice brought up something in the chat. One professor I worked with for an online class I taught as an adjunct years ago would make short video feedback for a major assignment so that the students could hear her tone of voice and expressions along with the feedback, and she was able to see if the video had been watched or not. And a part of the points for the assignments was watching and responding to the video feedback. That's great. I actually I never gave video feedback before, but I had a professor in my doctorate program always give us video feedback, and I felt it was more personal than just reading like the comments in the learning management system. So that's really interesting.
And I think just alongside that, because, you know, you get the tone, you get the perspective, you get the feeling from the individual, right? Is it supportive or not? I know, like, you know, even when I give the feedback on Moodle, I'm sure it's interpreted away because it just comes across as words. And they're probably already like, oh, Professor Osborne, Dr. Osborne's gonna tell me I'm wrong, as opposed to if I did it in person, it has a different tone.
Well, also, when you look at feedback on Moodle, you look at your grade first. So if I thought that I worked really hard on an assignment and I ended up with a 76, I'm going to be kind of probably fired up a little bit. And then I'm going to be reading that professor's feedback in that fired up tone.
Right.
Yeah. The other thing that, oh, I had a thought and now I'm forgetting it. The other thing I was thinking about, well, I'll go, thanks for sharing, Patrice. I'm going to close out the chat and I'm going to go to the next slide.
Can I just say one
Yeah,
thing?
go
I
ahead.
don't know if this is good or bad. Or how, and that, but in the development of that emotional intelligence concept. Is in terms of feedback and modeling feedback to help with. Comprehending it and then using it. So in the classroom setting, doing a project, let's say, and giving feedback to the students in real time. And then starting to wean the feedback from me to the students, giving feedback to each other.
Yeah.
And then them developing the skill of giving and receiving. And how do you do it in a way that is productive? And then how and constructive, and then how do you receive it in a way that you can then use it? And when it comes from your peer versus just coming from the
Professor, yeah. I remember when I was a student and I was on a clinical field work, and when I was a CI, so I was a clinical educator at the hospital, and I had a student, and at midterm I asked her if there was anything I should change, and she was like, you keep saying actually when you give me feedback. And I was like, what do you mean? And she was like the other day, I helped this patient get into the shower and you said you actually did really good at that. And she's like, I'm reading that as you're surprised that I could do that task.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, that's not what I meant. I was like, I think you're doing really well. But even, sometimes people perceive your feedback differently.
Yeah.
And asking for that feedback from your students, being like, hey, what is something that is working that what is something that I'm doing for you that's working? What is something you'd like to see an improvement on? I think could be a really great place to start. But also, giving them an option, like even doing the Caldwell model or, using some of those moments of reflection that I put in the PowerPoint, I think gives them the opportunity to talk about something, versus letting it fester. And sometimes as a teacher, I'm always like, why didn't you just tell me this? But they never felt like they had the opportunity to. So sometimes they need a little bit more like opportunity to give feedback. So some of the ideas I was brainstorming the other day about how you can incorporate this into your classes, into your programs. If you're doing a competency-based rubric or you're using, maybe a presentation, maybe you include an EI component, a reflective component. How do you think you did? What are some ways that you can self-reflect and improve? And you can include components of EI into professional presentation preparation. So after giving a presentation, having them self-reflect on how they did, what they could do better. Provide emotional intelligence training as a part of new faculty orientation. So maybe, we did something a part of new faculty orientation, or we have like a module about what emotional intelligence is, how it helps with giving feedback, and how it helps our students grow. Maybe doing more intradisciplinary role-playing experiences amongst the programs here might be fun. Making a small portion of a student's grade revolve around processing and reflecting and on their performance. Include EI with faculty mentorship. Use components of emotional intelligence and academic advising. One thing that I've enjoyed about the EI training intensive project I did with my students is that this semester I bring it back. So when students are late, I'm like, hey, you remember that module about like, emotion, managing your emotions, or that module that we talked about how, people perceive you in a certain way when you act a certain way. Like this is how do we apply that to this situation now? So I've been able to bring it back a lot. And I know the OT faculty has talked about doing some type of, strengths and barriers at student orientation, so that when we do academic advising, we can bring that back and be like, hey, you listed this as a strength. Or when we talked about, self-management, you listed that you do deep breathing and X, Y, and Z. Can we do these things now as you're struggling through some of your classes? But I hope this was helpful. Peer review, I think we had kind of talked about like teaching students to provide feedback that is kind, specific, and helpful. So I include peer review feedback in all of my group projects. I have the students send me the feedback that they're giving other students. And if there's something I feel like we need to talk about, or I'd be like, let's say this in a different way, I'll give them that feedback, but then they vocally give that feedback to their partners. I think it helps with practice. It helps make it more real, especially when they're about to get out there in the clinical or physical world. Some references, but that's it. Does anybody have any questions? No questions out there? Okay. Well, Patrice, get better. And I'm gonna stop recording and then we'll figure out how to get it onto the Moodle site. All right, bye.